So this is week 94 of our weekly discussions, and we're talking about EA conferences and also retreats and other EA events, if you will, but especially conferences. What is EA? It's this idea that you should maximize the good you can do, or I should take out should. Some people wouldn't have that there. It's the idea of maximizing the good you can do through your career, projects, and donations. And then it's also a community that's built around this idea. There are many individuals and organizations who care about it and who gather around it. We are the Christian EA group on this call. And today I just want to discuss briefly effective altruism conferences. So these have been going on for a very long time now. I think almost 10 years or around then, in various shapes and forms. And they've gone from just smallish conference of about, I've heard stories of like 70 people in a single venue, many sleeping on the floor and sleeping bags and so forth, very, very ragtag put together, to just massive productions with 1,500, I mean, really large numbers of people coming. And they take place several times a year in several places around the world, especially the EA hubs. So especially around London, Oxford, also in the Bay Area. There's a couple recently, very recently, we had EAGs in DC. We had one about a week or two ago, and in San Francisco, there was one about a month ago, as well as several EAGXs. And we had those in Berlin the other week, and we'll have one in Rotterdam in the Netherlands soon, and in Berkeley in December, and so forth. So first, the difference between the EAGs and the EAGXs is just who's organizing it. EAGs are organized by CEA directly by their team. EAGXs are funded by CEA, the Center of Effective Altruism, but organized by individuals who don't work for CEA. That's a fast, I mean, that's a rough summary. And each EAGXs are normally in places or neighborhoods where there are EAGs, but maybe not one of these key locations, although sometimes it is. I think there's an EAGX in Oxford, and there will be one in Berkeley, but you'll have EAGXs anywhere. There was one in Singapore just about, 2-3 weeks ago. I know some of us on this call were there. But yeah, I want to just talk about like the theory of change for these conferences, why EAs do them, as far as I can tell. And then we can dive into some questions about these. So yeah, the theory of change for these is pretty simple, but at the same time pretty complicated. Like there's a handbook that they actually produced that talks about how to put on an EAGX. And in this handbook, they describe that the minimum viable product for an EAGX is to get lots of EAs in a large room and to feed them intermittently over a weekend. And I think that kind of paints the picture of what these are about. They're really mostly about networking. They're really mostly about getting really talented, ambitious, passionate, compassionate people in a room to meet each other, to encourage each other, to discuss projects and plans with each other, for brainstorming, for collaborating and networking, also for getting funding, or to provide funding, and so forth. In terms of what they actually try to do, I mean, they try to do a lot more than just get people in a room talking to each other. They want to also increase people's excitement about doing good in the world. They want to increase people's knowledge about how to do this best, and they want to just form more connections between people who are committed, highly engaged EAs. Now, in terms of how they go about doing this, there's all sorts of activities at these conferences. I think most of us on this call have been to one in some shape or form, but throughout the entire weekend, you have every hour, you have a different kind of talk. They recommend having at least one kind of talk every hour, including a talk that is accessible for newcomers. They also have various other kinds of activities. So instead of lecture formats talks, they'll have workshops or mini discussions or fireside chats, or if it's more like a talk. They'll have a lot of networking events as well, like speed meeting for a specific kind of person interest. So speed meeting for those in global health, or speed meeting for those in animal welfare, speed meeting for those who are parents or earning to give, or something like that. They also have affinity group meetings, like Christian EA meetings. So at each EAG or EAGX now, EA for Christians is holding some kind of a breakfast or meetup, either organized by myself or someone on the each team, like Asha or like Vesa, or we'll ask someone in the community to lead one if we can't make it to a conference. So we're trying to have that at every single EAG. And yeah, I'd like to just talk about roughly maybe like bigger picture. This seems like a really important program of the effective altruism movement. If you think of the movement as a whole, and like what the movement is, what kind of services or activities the movement as a whole is putting on, the conferences and the retreats, which are oftentimes attached to conferences, are a pretty big piece. It's also a big piece of the budget. Take a typical EAGX. I've heard it reported that the EAGX in Boston, with 1,000 people there, cost all in about $400,000. So do the math, that's about $400 per person attending. These are pretty expensive to run. And yeah, there are many of these every year. But yeah, I'd like to just talk for a bit about whether any of us have been to these, whether an EAG or EAGX, or maybe some EAG retreat of various kinds. I'd love to hear whether it was valuable for you, and if so, like what was most valuable for you. And then I'd also like to discuss what EA conferences should do differently. We can think of things that that maybe could be easily improved, or maybe not so easily improved, but need to be improved. We can talk about optics. We can talk about theory of change. We can talk about cause areas that are represented in these conferences. We don't have to talk about anything in particular, but I'd love to talk about these three things. So let's do that now.